When I opened the front door to my house that afternoon, I never imagined my own daughter would be waiting for me with her eyes blazing with fury. Vanessa stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed and her face completely distraught. Next to her, Stanley was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, cell phone in hand and the veins in his neck bulging with rage. They didn't even let me close the door. "Have you lost your mind?" Vanessa screamed, marching toward me with furious strides. "My husband almost had a heart attack at the ATM." Her words bounced off the walls, laced with a venom I knew too well, but this time it didn't sting as much as before. Stanley stepped closer, brandishing his phone in front of my face. "Where is the money, Rose? What did you do?" "The card is empty. There's not a single dollar." His voice was a desperate roar, as if something that belonged to him by right had been snatched away. But that money was mine, my social security, the fruit of 42 years working at the textile mill, getting up before dawn, sacrificing my back and my knees. I placed my purse on the entry table with a calmness that even surprised me. "I changed my bank information," I said firmly, looking them both directly in the eye. "Now my social security goes to a new card, one that only I control." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Stanley froze, his face cycling from bright red to a ghostly white. It was as if the world had stopped for an instant. That second before the explosion that we all know is coming but no one can stop. "What? What did you say?" Vanessa stammered, clutching her hand to her chest. "Mom, you can't do that. We depend on that money. We have expenses. We have debts to pay." "Debts?" I repeated, feeling something inside me harden like steel. "Are you talking about Stanley's new truck? Or the vacation to Miami last month? Or maybe that giant 70-inch television you bought the week before?" Stanley took a step forward, his index finger pointed at me accusingly. "You live in our house. You eat our food. It's the least you can do to contribute." His words were spat out, loaded with a contempt he no longer tried to hide. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Our house. How strange that he called it that now, when the property papers still held my deceased husband's name and mine. This house that we bought with so much effort, brick by brick, sacrifice after sacrifice, was now their house in my son-in-law's vocabulary. "This is my house, Stanley," I said in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. Too firm, too sure. "You came to live here 3 years ago, remember? When you lost your apartment because you couldn't pay the rent." Vanessa let out a choked cry, as if I had slapped her. "I can't believe you're talking to me like this. I'm your daughter, your only daughter. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." Tears began to roll down her cheeks, but they were tears of rage, not sadness. I knew them well. I had seen them so many times when she didn't get what she wanted. "Everything you've done for me." The words came out colder than I intended. "Tell me, Vanessa, what exactly have you done for me?" She stammered, searching for arguments in the air. We give you a roof. We take care of you. You take care of me." I interrupted her, feeling decades of silence shattering inside me like a burst dam. "You take care of me when you wake me up at 6 o'clock in the morning to make breakfast. When I have to wash your clothes, iron Stanley's shirts, clean the bathroom you leave dirty. That's taking care of me." Stanley punched the wall with his fist, shaking my wedding photo that had been hanging there for 45 years. "You're ungrateful, a selfish old woman. Without us, you'd be rotting in some run-down nursing home." His words should have hurt me. 6 months ago, they would have destroyed me. But today, after what I had lived through, the humiliations I had swallowed in silence, The nights crying in my room while they laughed in the living room, spending my $1,500 monthly on their whims. Those words bounced off me without causing any damage. "Maybe you're right," I said, picking up my purse again. "Maybe I am a selfish old woman. But this selfish old woman just got her freedom back." Vanessa sank onto the sofa, the same sofa I had paid for when theirs broke. Her hands were trembling as she covered her face. "You can't do this to us, Mom. Please. Stanley has medical treatments. We have financial commitments. You're going to ruin us." "I'm going to ruin you," I repeated slowly, letting each word settle in the thick air of the room. "Isn't that ironic? For 3 years you've lived off my social security, every dollar I earned with my sweat and hard work. And now that I decide that money should be mine again, I'm the one who's ruining you." Stanley approached again, but this time there was something different in his eyes. It wasn't just rage anymore, it was fear. Real fear of losing his income source, his personal ATM that had worked for so long without protest. "Rose, let's be reasonable," he said, trying to soften his tone, but not quite succeeding. "We can come to an agreement. You don't have to do this so drastic." I looked at this man who had entered my family 7 years ago, with his charming smile and his promises to take care of my daughter. The same man who now saw me only as a source of money, as a resource to exploit until nothing was left of me. "The only agreement we're going to have," I said as I walked toward the stairs leading to my room, "is that starting today, my money is only mine, and if that bothers you, well, the door is open. You know where it is." I left them there, in the middle of the living room, with their mouths open and their plans crumbling. I climbed each step, feeling an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. It had taken me 69 years to learn this lesson. That love can't be bought, that real family doesn't exploit you, and that it is never, ever too late to reclaim your dignity. Behind me, I heard Vanessa sobbing and Stanley cursing under his breath. But for the first time in 3 years, those sounds no longer broke my heart. They only reminded me why I had made the most important decision of my life that morning, when I walked into the bank and said the words that would change everything. "I want to change my bank information. I need a new card, one that no one else can touch." It all started 3 years ago, at the funeral of my husband, Robert. I remember the smell of white carnations, mixed with the aroma of coffee the neighbors had brewed for the attendees. I remember Vanessa's hands clutching mine as I watched the casket descend, taking with it 45 years of my life, of shared laughter, of silent breakfasts, of silly arguments and sweet reconciliations. Robert died of a massive heart attack on a Tuesday morning. He was watering the garden plants, those roses he loved so much, when he simply collapsed. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. The doctor told me he didn't suffer, that it was instant. But I suffered. God, how I suffered. The first months in that empty house were a silent hell. Every corner screamed his absence. His coffee mug in the cabinet, his slippers by the bed, his toothbrush that I didn't have the courage to throw away until 6 months later. I would wake up in the pre-dawn hours, expecting to find him in the kitchen reading the newspaper, and the reality would hit me each time, as if it were the first. Vanessa came to visit me often at first. "Mum, you can't stay here alone," she would say, sitting on the living room sofa where Robert and I had watched so many movies. "Come live with us for a while, just until you recover." Stanley would nod beside her, with that smile that then seemed genuine to me, full of filial concern. I resisted for weeks. This house was my sanctuary, the place where I had raised Vanessa, where every wall held a memory. But the loneliness weighed like lead in my bones. The nights grew endless. The silence was so thick I could touch it. So I finally accepted. Just for a while, I told them, until I learned to be alone again. I packed 2 suitcases with the essentials: clothes, a few photos, the green knitted shawl Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. I closed my front door with a knot in my throat, promising myself I would be back soon. How naive I was, how blind I was. The first months at Vanessa's place were bearable. She worked at a boutique downtown, and Stanley was supposedly looking for a job after being fired from the insurance company where he worked. I helped with the housework. I cooked, I cleaned. It made me feel useful, necessary. I thought I was contributing to the family while healing my broken heart. But things began to change subtly. First, it was Stanley who asked me to borrow $200 for a course that, according to him, would help him get a job. "I'll pay you back next month, Rose, I promise." He never returned it. Then Vanessa needed $300 to pay off a credit card debt. "It's an emergency, Mum. If I don't pay, they'll charge me sky-high interest." I never saw that money back either. At first, I didn't care. They were my family, my only family. If my money could help them, why not? Robert always said that family came first, that money came and went, but blood ties were eternal. I believed those words as if they were gospel. One day, Stanley arrived with a proposal. "Rose, I've been thinking. It would be easier if your Social Security went directly into our account. That way we can manage the household expenses better. You won't have to worry about a thing. We'll take care of everything." He said it so casually, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. Vanessa supported the idea immediately. "It's true, Mum. It's simpler that way. Besides, you're not good with numbers. Remember when Dad took care of all the finances? We'll do the same. We'll take care of you." Their words sounded reasonable, wrapped in concern and love, or what I thought was love. I signed the papers at the bank without reading the fine print. Trustingly, I gave them access to my card. I handed over control of my $1,500 monthly without asking questions. After all, I was living under their roof, eating their food, using their electricity. It was only fair, right? It was the right thing to do. The transformation was gradual, so slow that I didn't realize it until I was already trapped. Stanley began treating me less like a mother-in-law and more like a servant. "Rose, breakfast is taking too long. I'm in a hurry. Rose, these shirts aren't ironed well. Do them again. Rose, you cleaned the bathroom poorly. There are still smudges on the mirror." Vanessa stopped asking me how I was. Conversations about my day, my feeling, my grieving process simply disappeared. Now we only talked about chores, shopping I needed to do, meals I had to prepare. I had become a shadow in that house, a useful ghost who cooked, cleaned, and paid bills without complaining. On weekends, they would go out to expensive restaurants without inviting me. "Those places are too noisy, Mom. At your age, you need rest," Vanessa would say, while putting on a coral-colored dress that I knew had cost at least $300. Dollars that came from my Social Security. I stayed home, eating leftovers, watching television in the small room they had assigned me in the back of the house. One day I found a forgotten receipt on the kitchen table. It was from a jewelry store in the most exclusive mall in the city. Stanley had bought Vanessa a gold necklace for $1,200. My heart sank. While I wore the same worn-out clothes from years ago, while I denied myself basic treats like a new book or a pastry from the bakery I liked, they were indulging in luxuries with my money. I started paying more attention. The nights out, the new clothes that appeared in their closets every week, the sports car Stanley bought with his savings, even though he hadn't worked a single day in 2 years. It all fit together like a macabre puzzle. My Social Security wasn't being used for household expenses. It was funding a lifestyle they couldn't afford on their own. I tried to talk to Vanessa one night while we were washing dishes. Honey, I've been thinking that maybe I should go back to my house. Enough time has passed since your dad died. I need to learn to live alone. My hands trembled as I rinsed a plate. She looked at me with cold eyes, so different from the warm eyes of the child I had raised. Go back to your house? Mum, don't be silly, that house is neglected. Besides, how are you going to live alone at your age? What if you fall? What if you get sick? You're safe here. You're cared for here. But there was no love in her voice, only calculation. That night I cried in my small room, hugging the pillow to muffle the sobs. I missed Robert with an intensity that tore me in two. He never would have allowed this. He would have defended me. But Robert was dead, buried under cold ground, and I was alone, facing a reality I didn't want to accept. My own daughter, the baby I had nursed, the child whose scraped knees I had patched up after every fall, the teenager whose tears I had dried after every heartbreak, was using me. She was squeezing me like an inexhaustible resource, a source of money with no feelings, no dignity, no value beyond what I could provide economically. But I still didn't have the courage to do anything. I still clung to the hope that things would improve, that it was just a difficult phase, that the love we once shared would resurface. I lied to myself every morning when I woke up, every night when I went to bed. I swallowed the humiliation because the alternative was accepting that I had lost not only my husband, but also my daughter. Months passed and the situation only got worse. Stanley didn't even pretend to look for a job anymore. He would get up at noon, eat the breakfast I prepared without even saying thank you, and spend the rest of the day on the sofa, watching sports or playing video games. Vanessa would come home from work, and instead of helping me with dinner, she would shut herself in her room to talk on the phone with her friends about their next vacation. One Friday night, while I was cleaning the kitchen after they went out to dinner, I found the bank statement thrown in the trash can. I pulled it out with trembling hands and unfolded it under the lamplight. My eyes scanned the lines of expenses: restaurants, bars, clothing stores, spas, gyms. In a single month, they had spent $2,800. My Social Security was $1,500. The rest came from credit cards I didn't know existed, cards that were being paid with my money from the following month. I sat down in the kitchen chair, feeling the world spin around me. They were getting into debt, living beyond their means, and using my Social Security as a bottomless pit to cover their excesses. How much longer could this last? What would happen when I couldn't pay their debts anymore? Would they throw me out onto the street like an old rag that was no longer useful? That night, lying in my narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of my small room, I made a decision. I needed to know exactly what was happening with my money. I needed to understand the magnitude of the problem before I could do anything about it. And above all, I needed to recover at least a little of the control I had lost over my own life. The next morning I got up before dawn, as always. I made coffee, set the breakfast table, cooked scrambled eggs and toast. Everything on autopilot, while my mind worked on a plan. I needed information. I needed proof. I needed to see with my own eyes the extent of the theft they were committing against me. When Vanessa and Stanley got up, I had already made a decision. I need to go to the bank today, I announced while pouring coffee. I have to sort out some matters regarding your father's account that I left pending. Stanley looked up from his phone with an instant look of alarm. The bank? Why do you need to go to the bank? If you need something, I can go for you. His tone was too anxious, too controlling. They are personal matters, I replied firmly, surprising myself. Documents I need to sign. Things about the inheritance. I lied without batting an eye, and the lie came so naturally that it almost scared me. Vanessa exchanged a worried glance with Stanley. "Mum, I don't think it's a good idea for you to go out alone. Let me go with you. I get off work at 3 o'clock. We can go together." But I knew if she came with me, I would never get the answers I needed. "I'll go alone," I said, and there was something new in my voice, something that made them draw back slightly. 10 o'clock in the morning. Don't worry about me. I grabbed my purse and left the house before they could protest further. The bank was 20 minutes away by bus. During the ride, my heart was pounding so hard I thought all the passengers could hear it. What was I going to discover? Did I really want to know the truth? But it was too late to turn back. I had crossed an invisible line that morning, and there was no return. At the bank, a young executive named Brenda served me with a professional smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" Her eyes were kind, non-judgmental, and that gave me the courage I needed. "I need to see all the transactions on my account for the last 3 years," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "All the deposits and all the withdrawals. I want a complete statement." Brenda nodded and began typing on her computer. After a few minutes, the printer spat out page after page of information. When it finished, there was a stack of nearly 50 pages of paper in front of me. "Do you want to review it here, or would you prefer to take it home?" she asked. "I'll review it here," I replied, taking the stack with hands that barely trembled now. I sat in one of the chairs in the waiting area and began to read. And with every page I turned, I felt my heart growing smaller, harder, colder. The numbers didn't lie. In 3 years, they had spent more than $60,000 of my Social Security. $60,000. The money I had earned with 42 years of work, getting up before the sun, sacrificing my health, my knees that now creaked with every step, my back that ached every night. I saw $500 withdrawals at electronics stores, $800 at luxury restaurants, $1,000 at a jewelry store, $2,000 at a travel agency, purchases and more purchases, luxuries and more luxuries, all paid for with my effort, my pain, my dignity. But the worst wasn't the big expenses. The worst were the small details that revealed the true nature of their betrayal. $20 withdrawals at bars at 2 o'clock in the morning, $50 at beauty salons every week, $150 on clothes every month. While I wore the same 3 worn dresses I had brought from my house, while I refused to buy medication for my arthritis because I didn't want to be a burden, they were walking around in new clothes and perfect manicures. Brenda approached after an hour, a look of concern on her face. "Are you all right, ma'am? Can I get you a glass of water?" It was then I realized that tears were rolling down my cheeks without me noticing. "I'm fine," I lied, wiping the tears with the back of my hand. I need to know something. Is it possible to change my bank information? To have my Social Security deposit into a new account? A card that only I have?" Brenda's eyes lit up with understanding. She had seen this before. I knew it by the way she nodded. "Of course it's possible, ma'am, and I can help you right now if you wish. I just need to see your ID and sign some forms." My hand moved toward my purse, almost on instinct. "Yes," I said, and my voice sounded firmer than I felt. "Yes, I want to do it now. I want a new account, a new card, something only I can touch." Brenda worked quickly and efficiently. She explained every step of the process, every form I signed. In less than an hour, I had a completely new account, with a card that would arrive at my address in 5 business days. My Social Security for the next month would deposit directly there, in a place where Vanessa and Stanley couldn't reach it. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" Brenda asked when we finished. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of admiration and sadness, as if she understood exactly what was happening. "Yes," I said, surprising myself again. "I want extra copies of these bank statements, 3 complete sets. If I was going to do this, if I was going to reclaim my life, I needed to be prepared for what came next." I left the bank with my purse feeling heavier, carrying not only the papers, but also a new determination. The sun was shining brighter than when I had entered, or maybe it was just that I could see it better now. For 3 years, I had lived in a fog of pain and manipulation, but that fog was dissipating, revealing an ugly but liberating truth. On the bus ride back, I hugged my purse to my chest and looked out the window. We passed the bakery where Robert used to buy me sweet rolls on Sundays. We passed the park where Vanessa had learned to ride her bicycle. We passed the church where we had been married 45 years ago. All those memories, all those beautiful recollections. And yet here I was, a 69-year-old woman, having to protect myself from my own daughter. When I got home, Vanessa was at work and Stanley was snoring on the sofa, the television tuned to some football game. I silently went up to my room and hid the papers at the bottom of my suitcase, beneath my underwear and old socks. No one would look there. No one would think that I, the foolish old woman who let herself be manipulated, would have the cunning to hide evidence. I sat on my bed and looked around my small room. The peeling cream-coloured walls, the window that faced the back alley, the tiny closet where my clothes barely fit. This was not a room for a beloved guest. It was a servant's quarters, a place to keep the employee who cooked, cleaned, and paid the bills. But in 5 days, when my new card arrived, everything would change. In 5 days, I would begin to recover not only my money, but something much more valuable. My dignity, my self-worth, my right to exist as something more than a source of income for people who had forgotten what it meant to love. The next 5 days were the longest of my life. Every morning I woke up wondering if that would be the day the card arrived. Every time I heard the mail carrier, my heart jumped. But I had to act normal, not raise suspicions, continue to be the submissive and obedient Rose they expected. Stanley noticed something different about me on the 3rd day. I was serving dinner when he looked at me with narrowed eyes. "You've been weird lately, Rose. Is something wrong?" His tone was accusatory, as if I had no right to have thoughts of my own. "I'm fine," I replied, keeping my eyes on the plate of chicken I was serving. "Just a little tired. You know, old age." I let my shoulders slump a little more, let my voice sound weaker. It was a role I had played for 3 years. A few more days wouldn't make a difference. Vanessa came home that night with shopping bags. Again. I recognized the logos of the expensive stores at the mall. "Mum, I need you to iron this lavender dress for tomorrow. I have an important dinner with friends," she said, dropping the bags in my room as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I looked at that dress that had probably cost $200 of my Social Security, and something inside me broke definitively. "Why don't you iron it yourself?" The words came out before I could stop them. Vanessa turned to me with wide eyes. "What did you say?" Her voice had a dangerous tone, the same tone she used when she was a teenager and didn't get what she wanted. "Nothing," I rushed to say, hating myself for my cowardice, but knowing I had to wait. Only 2 more days until the card arrived. 2 more days and I could stop pretending. "I'll iron it after I wash the dishes." The 4th day was when I almost ruined everything. I was cleaning Vanessa and Stanley's room, something I did every week even though it killed my back, when I saw an open envelope on the desk. It was a statement from a credit card I didn't know about. Curiosity overcame caution, and I pulled it out of the envelope. The balance was $15,000. $15,000 of debt on a card I had never seen. I checked the charges with trembling hands. Restaurants, travel, clothes, jewelry. A month at the beach they had taken last summer while I stayed home alone. The giant screen television in the living room. The new dining room furniture. Everything had been bought on credit, and I knew exactly who was paying those credit bills every month. Or rather, trying to pay them because it clearly wasn't enough. They were sinking into debt while draining my social security, and when my money was no longer enough, what would they do? Would they kick me out? Would they force me to sell my house to pay for their whims? I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly put the envelope back where I had found it. Stanley entered the room and found me dusting the nightstand with visibly trembling hands. "What are you doing in here?" he asked suspiciously. "Cleaning," I replied without looking at him. "Like every Thursday." He stood in the doorway for a long, uncomfortable moment before grunting something unintelligible and leaving. I left that room with my heart pounding so hard I thought I was going to faint. It had been close. Too close. The fifth day. Finally. The card arrived. I heard the mail carrier drop the mail in the box around 11 o'clock in the morning. Vanessa was at work, and Stanley had gone out to meet some friends, probably to spend more money they didn't have. I was alone. I ran to the door with an energy I hadn't felt in years. My hand was trembling so much I could barely open the mailbox. There it was, among the bills and junk mail, an official bank envelope with my name. Only my name. Not Vanessa's, not Stanley's. Mine. I opened it with clumsy fingers and pulled out the new card. It was silver, gleaming under the sunlight, and it felt like freedom in my hands. My name was elegantly engraved. Rose Miller. It wasn't just a card. It was a key to a new life. I slipped the envelope into my purse and went back inside the house. I had to activate the card, change the PIN, make sure everything worked correctly. I called the number in the instructions and followed every step meticulously. When the automated voice confirmed that my card was active and that my next Social Security deposit would arrive in 2 days, I felt a wave of relief so intense that I had to sit down. 2 days. In 2 days. When Stanley tried to withdraw money from the ATM, as he always did on the first of the month, there would be nothing. The account would be empty. And then the confrontation I had been postponing for 3 years would come. That night, Vanessa came home in a bad mood. She had had a difficult day at the boutique, she said, although I suspected it had more to do with a customer returning something she had bought with my money. "Mum, what's for dinner?" she asked without even greeting me. "Roast chicken and mashed potatoes," I replied, putting the plates on the table. Like every Thursday. Stanley arrived shortly after, smelling of beer and with glassy eyes. He sat down at the table without washing his hands and began serving himself without waiting for me to sit down. "This chicken is dry," he complained after the first bite. "Can't you cook something decent for once?" Something inside me hardened. I looked at that plate of food I had prepared with ingredients bought with my money, on a stove I had paid for, in a house that was mine. "If you don't like it," I said in a voice I didn't recognize as my own, "you can cook it yourself tomorrow." The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa stopped chewing and looked at me as if I had grown a second head. Stanley dropped his fork with a metallic clang against the plate. "What did you just say?" he asked in a dangerously low voice. "What you heard," I replied, standing up from the table. "I'm tired. I'm going to my room." And I left, leaving them with their mouths open, feeling their looks of disbelief fixed on my back. In my room, I sat on the bed and took the new card out of my purse. I held it under the lamplight and saw my distorted reflection on its silver surface. This woman in the reflection, with her wrinkles and grey hair, with her hands stained from years of work, this woman was me. And this woman had just taken the first real step toward her freedom. I hid the card in the same place where I had hidden the bank statements. Tomorrow would be Saturday, the day after tomorrow, Sunday. And on Monday, the first of the month, when my Social Security deposited into the new account and not the old one, my real battle would begin. But this time, I wouldn't be fighting empty-handed. This time, I would have something they had underestimated for too long, my own will to survive. I went to bed that night with a mixture of fear and anticipation. I knew what was coming would be ugly, painful, probably devastating. But I also knew there was no other option. I had reached the end of a road, and the only possible direction was forward, toward the light, toward freedom, even if the price was losing the only people I had left in this world. Because in the end, what value did those people have if they only saw me as a means to finance their lives? What kind of love was that which only existed as long as the money flowed? The time had come to find out if there was anything real left beneath all that greed, or if I had lost my daughter much earlier than I wanted to admit. The weekend passed in a strange tension. Vanessa and Stanley barely spoke to me. They ate in silence when I was present, or they just shut themselves in their room with food they bought out. The house felt like a minefield where any movement could detonate an explosion. But I had made a decision, and I wasn't going to back down. For the first time in 3 years, I bought food only for myself. I put my things on a separate shelf in the refrigerator with a note that said, Rose. I felt ridiculous doing it, like a distrustful roommate, but it was necessary. I needed to establish boundaries that should have existed from the beginning. On the third day after the confrontation, I heard Vanessa crying in her room. My motherly instinct urged me to go up, to comfort her, to fix things as I had always done. But I forced myself to stay seated in the kitchen, drinking my tea, reminding myself that comforting her now would be surrendering. It would be returning to the same old pattern where I gave in and they won. Stanley tried a different tactic on the fourth day. He came into the kitchen where I was preparing my lunch and sat at the table with a contrite expression. Rose, we need to talk, he said, with a tone that I suppose was meant to sound conciliatory. Talk, I replied without stopping cutting vegetables for my salad. Look, I know things got out of hand. I admit it. But we're family. We should be able to resolve this civilized. His words sounded rehearsed, as if he had practiced them in front of the mirror. I am being civilized, I said, turning to look at him. I gave you clear options. Pay rent and contribute equally, or find another place. I don't see what's uncivilized about that. $800 is too much, he protested. You know we don't have that money. $800 for a room in this part of New York is a bargain, I replied firmly. And if you don't have that money, then I suggest you adjust your expenses. Cancel the streaming services. Sell the giant television. Stop eating out. Like I had to do for years when Robert and I were paying off this house. Stanley clenched his jaw. Vanessa is very upset. She cries all the time. She says you're rejecting her, that you don't love her anymore. Those words cut through me like knives, but I held my ground. I love my daughter. I will always love her. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. It doesn't mean letting them use you until there's nothing left of you. She never meant to hurt you, Stanley insisted, but even he seemed not to believe his own words. Maybe not, I conceded. Maybe they never stopped to think about what they were doing to me. But that doesn't change the fact that they did it, and now they have to live with the consequences. Stanley stood up abruptly. You're impossible. I don't know how Robert put up with you all those years. And he left the kitchen, leaving me trembling with contained rage. That night, while I was in my room reading, I heard a soft knock on my door. Mom! It was Vanessa's voice, small and broken. Can I come in? I hesitated for a moment before answering. Come in. Vanessa entered and stood by the door, nervously wringing her hands. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her face was pale. For a moment, I saw the girl she had been, scared and vulnerable, and my heart softened dangerously. What do you need? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. I wanted to apologize, she said, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. You're right, about everything. Stanley and we took advantage of you. We used you, and I'm so sorry, Mum. I really am sorry. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. But there was something in the way she avoided my gaze, something in the tone of her voice that made me doubt. Are you sorry because you recognize that it was wrong? I asked gently. Or are you sorry because now there are consequences? Vanessa let out a sob. Does it matter? I'm saying I'm sorry, isn't that enough? No, I replied, and the word came out harder than I intended. It's not enough, because I've seen this pattern before. Vanessa, since you were a little girl, you did something wrong, you cried, you apologized, and everything went back to normal. But this time it can't be like that. This time, apologies are not enough. Then what do you want from me? Her voice rose, frustration replacing the sadness. What do I have to do for you to forgive me? I want you to change, I said simply. I want Stanley to get a job. I want you to take responsibility for your debts. I want you to treat me like a person, not an ATM. And I want you, if you're going to live in my house, to contribute like responsible adults. You're asking too much, Vanessa exploded. We can't do all that overnight. I'm not asking you to do it overnight, I replied calmly. You have until the end of the month. That's 3 weeks. Enough time for Stanley to find even a temporary job. Enough time for you to make a budget and decide if you can afford to stay here. Vanessa looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and pain. And if we can't? Would you really kick us out onto the street? Your own daughter? If you can't afford $800 in rent here, I said, feeling my voice break, then you need to find a more affordable place. A small apartment. A room in a shared house. There are options, Vanessa. Just none of those options include living off my Social Security. She stood there for a long moment, looking at me as if I were a stranger. And I suppose in a way I was. I was no longer the submissive mother she had known. I was no longer the woman who swallowed pain and humiliation to keep the peace. I don't recognize you, Vanessa finally said in a cold voice. This isn't you. You're right, I replied. This isn't the woman you turned into your servant. This is the woman I should have been from the beginning, the woman your father would have wanted me to be. Vanessa left the room without saying anything else, closing the door harder than necessary. I sat on my bed, feeling the tears stream down my cheeks. This was harder than I had imagined. Much harder. But then I remembered the bank statements. I remembered the nights crying in silence while they laughed in the living room. I remembered every humiliation, every moment I felt invisible and useless. And I knew I couldn't give up now, not after coming so far. The next morning, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang around 10 o'clock. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a beautiful young woman of about 25 with a warm smile. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. Grandma, she said, and then I remembered. Caroline. My granddaughter. The daughter Vanessa had had young, before marrying Stanley. Caroline, who had gone to study in another city 5 years ago, and with whom I had lost touch. Caroline. My heart skipped a beat. What are you doing here? Can I come in? She asked, looking cautiously inside the house. I let her in, confused but happy to see her. We sat in the living room and Caroline took my hands in hers. Grandma, I need to talk to you about something important, she said seriously. And Mum can't know I'm here. My heart started beating faster. What's wrong, dear? Caroline took a deep breath. Grandma, I've been talking to my Aunt Brenda, your friend from the building where you lived before. She told me you haven't visited her in 3 years. I got worried and started to investigate. She paused, her eyes full of concern. Grandma, what has been happening to you? And then, for the first time since everything began, I broke down. I told Caroline everything, every painful detail, every humiliation, every dollar stolen. She listened in silence, squeezing my hands, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. I knew something was wrong, she said when I finished. Mum always made excuses when I asked about you. She said you were busy, you were tired, you didn't want to talk. But something didn't add up. She looked me straight in the eyes. Grandma, you can't stay here. It's not safe. It's not healthy. Where would I go? I asked, feeling the weight of my age for the first time in days. Caroline smiled. With me? Or back to your house? Or with Brenda? She said she would be delighted to have you. You have options, Grandma. You are not trapped here. Her words were like a light in the darkness. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone all this time. There were people who truly cared about me, not my money, but me. Caroline's visit changed everything. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I had an ally, someone who saw me as a human being and not a resource. We spent the whole morning talking, planning, rebuilding the relationship that Vanessa had systematically sabotaged with her excuses and lies. Mum always said you were too tired to have visitors, Caroline told me sadly, that your health was fragile and you needed rest. I believed her. Grandma, I thought I was protecting you by not bothering you. I was never too tired for you, I said, squeezing her hands. Vanessa kept you away from me because she knew you would see what was really happening. You were always more observant, more critical of her decisions. Caroline nodded slowly. I always had my doubts about Stanley. From the day Mum introduced him, I didn't like something about him. The way he talked about money, about success, as if they were the only important things in life. She paused. Do you know he asked me for money once? 2 years ago. $200 that he said he urgently needed. I had just started working, and it was all I had saved. Did you give it to him? I asked, although I already knew the answer. Yes, she admitted shamefully. And he never paid me back. When I reminded him months later, he got angry. He said I was selfish, that families should help each other without expecting anything in return. That's when I started to distance myself. I stopped coming as often, and Mum did nothing to stop it. We were so absorbed in our conversation that we didn't hear Vanessa come down the stairs. Her voice startled both of us. Caroline, what are you doing here? Caroline stood up slowly, facing her mother with an expression I had never seen before. It was one of disappointment, mixed with contained anger. I came to see my grandmother, Mum. Something I should have done a long time ago. Vanessa cautiously entered the living room. I don't understand. I told you Grandma was fine. Why didn't you call me before you came? Because Brenda told me some interesting things, Caroline replied firmly. About how Grandma hasn't visited her own house in 3 years. about how you stopped answering my calls when I asked about her, about how every time I wanted to come, you made excuses. Vanessa's face paled. I was just protecting her. Your grandmother has been having a difficult time since Grandpa died. She needed space. She needed space, Caroline repeated incredulously. Or you needed no one to find out what you and Stanley were doing to her. What is that supposed to mean? Vanessa's voice rose defensively. It means I found out everything, Mum. Caroline crossed her arms. Grandma told me about the money, about how you treated her, about how you turned her into your maid while emptying her bank account. Vanessa looked at me with eyes full of betrayal. You told her? Her? Why would you do that? To turn her against me? I didn't turn her against you, I replied wearily. You did that yourself with your actions. Caroline came here worried about me, and I told her the truth. Something I should have done a long time ago. Stanley appeared at that moment, still in pajamas, even though it was nearly noon. What is all this fuss about? He asked irritably. Then he saw Caroline and his expression changed. Oh, you? Yes, me, Caroline said coldly. The family member you prefer to keep away. Now I understand why. Look, kid, Stanley began condescendingly, you don't understand the full situation. Your grandmother is confused, mixing things up. I am not confused, I interjected before Caroline could respond, and I have all the bank statements to prove every word I said. I got up and went to my room, returning with the copies I had saved. I handed them to Caroline. Read for yourself. Caroline took the papers and began to review them. I saw her eyes widen with each page, her jaw tighten, her hands begin to tremble slightly. When she finished, she looked at her mother with an expression I had never seen on her face. It was pure disgust. $60,000, she said in a trembling voice. In 3 years. Mum, how could you? She's your mother. She raised you alone after my biological father left. She worked 2 jobs to give you a good education. And this is how you repay her. You don't understand, Vanessa said, the tears starting to flow. We had debts, problems. She wanted to help. She wanted to help, or you manipulated her into giving you access to her money. Caroline threw the papers onto the table. I saw the charges. Mum, expensive restaurants, jewelry, vacations, designer clothes, while Grandma was living in a room the size of a closet and wearing the same worn-out clothes. Stanley tried to intervene. Listen, Caroline, this is an adult matter. You don't have to get involved in an adult matter. Caroline turned to him furiously. Financially exploiting a vulnerable elderly woman is an adult matter. Do you know what that's called legally? Elder abuse. It's a crime. The silence that followed was heavy. I saw Vanessa and Stanley exchange panicked glances. Caroline had said out loud what I had been too afraid to admit, even to myself. What they had done to me was not just immoral. It was illegal. No one is going to involve the police, Vanessa said quickly. This is a family misunderstanding. We'll resolve it internally. How have you been resolving it so far? Caroline asked sarcastically. Grandma, come with me. Now. Pack your things. You're coming to my apartment. Caroline, Vanessa protested. You can't take her away like this. This is her house. Exactly, Caroline said. It's her house, not yours. And I think it's time Grandma decided who stays and who goes. All eyes turned to me. It was the moment of truth, the decision that would change everything. I could feel the weight of 3 years of pain, humiliation, and forced silence pressing down on my shoulders. Caroline is right, I finally said, my voice sounding stronger than I felt. This is my house, the house Robert and I bought together, the house where we raised Vanessa, and I think it's time for it to truly be my home again. Mum, Vanessa whispered, please don't do this. You have until the end of the month, I continued, ignoring her plea. As I already told you, you can stay if you pay rent and start contributing equally, or you can find another place, but I will no longer be your source of income. Stanley took a step toward me with clenched fists, but Caroline immediately stepped between us. Don't even think about it, she said in a dangerously low voice. Touch her and I swear I'll call the police right now. Stanley backed away, but his gaze was full of hatred. This is your fault, he spat at me. You brought this brat into our business. You destroyed this family. No, I said firmly. You destroyed this family when you decided I was worth more dead than alive. When you looked at me and saw only dollars instead of a person. When you turned my pain into your opportunity. Vanessa collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing uncontrollably. Part of me wanted to comfort her, hug her as I had done thousands of times when she was a child. But another part, the new, stronger part that had awakened at the bank 2 weeks ago, held firm. Caroline gently took my arm. Come on, Grandma. Let's pack some of your things. You'll stay with me this week while we decide the next steps. I don't need to stay with you, I said, surprising myself. This is my house. If anyone has to leave, it's them. Caroline smiled proudly. That's right, Grandma. I looked at Vanessa and Stanley one last time. You have 2 weeks, I said in a clear voice. Start looking for jobs, make a budget, decide if you can stay under my conditions, or pack your things and find another place. The decision is yours. I climbed the stairs with Caroline by my side, leaving behind Vanessa's sobs and Stanley's muffled curses. With every step I took, I felt the weight of 3 years drop from my shoulders. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if Vanessa and I could ever repair our relationship. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking forward instead of just surviving. In my room, Caroline helped me organize my few belongings. I'm proud of you, Grandma, she said while folding my clothes. I know this isn't easy. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, I admitted. But also the most necessary. 6 months later, I was sitting on the terrace of my house, my real house, the one Robert and I had built together, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. The garden that had been neglected for 3 years was now blooming again. I had replanted the roses Robert loved so much, and every morning their aroma reminded me that life could be beautiful even after loss. Vanessa and Stanley had left 2 weeks after my ultimatum. They didn't pay rent. They didn't really look for work. They simply packed their things in the middle of the night and left without saying goodbye. I found a note on the kitchen table. I hope you're happy alone, it said in Vanessa's tight handwriting. There was no signature, no farewell, just that phrase full of bitterness. The first days after they left were strange. The house felt too silent, too big. I would wake up in the pre-dawn hours expecting to hear their voices, their steps, even their complaints. But slowly that silence transformed into peace. I learned to enjoy my unhurried mornings, my meals without criticism, my afternoons without demands. Caroline came to visit me every weekend. We cooked together, watched old movies, talked about everything and nothing. She told me about her job as a graphic designer, about her dreams of opening her own studio someday. I told her stories from when I was young, about her grandparents, about the life I had lived before losing myself in grief. Brenda also became part of my life again, my dear friend, whom I had unknowingly abandoned when I moved in with Vanessa. She didn't hold a grudge. She welcomed me with open arms and tears in her eyes. I missed you so much, she told me that first day I went to visit her. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help. I didn't know how to ask for help either, I admitted. I had convinced myself that I deserved everything that was happening to me, that it was my obligation to sacrifice myself for my daughter. Brenda took my hands, her brown eyes full of the wisdom of her 73 years. Sacrifice is not love when it comes at the expense of your own dignity, Rose. That's self-destruction. As the months passed, I began to rediscover who I was beyond being a mother, beyond being a widow. I joined a book club at the neighborhood library. I started taking watercolor painting classes at the community center. Small, simple things, but they made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. My social security, those $1,500 monthly that used to disappear into others' accounts, were now mine to manage. I paid my bills, bought quality food, allowed myself small luxuries like new books or fresh flowers for the house. I even started saving. For the first time in 3 years, I had a financial cushion that grew every month. One day, 2 months after they left, I received a text from Vanessa. It was brief, cold. I need you to loan me $5,000. It's an emergency. Not even a hello, not a question about how I was, just a demand disguised as a request. I replied after thinking about it for an entire night. No, Vanessa, I will not loan you money. If you have a real emergency, seek help from social services or friends. But my money is no longer available to you. Her response was instant and venomous. I knew you were selfish. I wish Dad was alive to see what you've become. I blocked her number after reading that. Not out of anger, but out of self-protection. Every message from her was a hook trying to drag me back into the toxic pattern we had. Caroline hugged me when I told her, "You did the right thing, Grandma. Mum needs to hit rock bottom before she can truly change, and you helping her just delays that." "Do you think we can ever fix our relationship?" I asked her in a small voice, because despite everything, Vanessa was still my daughter. Caroline thought about it for a moment. Maybe, but only if she truly recognizes what she did. Not just empty apologies because she needs something. A real recognition of the damage she caused. And that might take years, Grandma, or it might never happen. I learned to live with that uncertainty. Some days were harder than others. I would see mothers and daughters walking together in the park and feel a pang of pain. I would hear Brenda on the phone with her children and wonder if I would ever have those conversations with Vanessa again. But then I would look around my house, truly mine now, filled with things I had chosen. I would look at my bank account with its growing balance. I would look at the watercolor paintings I had created, imperfect, but made with love. And I knew I had made the right decision. One spring afternoon, while watering Robert's roses, I heard someone knocking at the door. When I opened it, I found Vanessa standing on the step. She looked different, thinner, with deep circles under her eyes, without the perfect makeup she always wore. Her clothes were simple, worn. "Hi, Mum," she said in a trembling voice. "Vanessa." My voice came out colder than I intended, but it was an automatic defense mechanism. Can I come in? I just want to talk. I promise I didn't come to ask for anything." Her eyes were filled with genuine tears, so different from the manipulative tears I had seen before. I let her in, even though every instinct screamed at me to be cautious. We sat in the living room, with a considerable space between us on the sofa. "Stanley and I separated," Vanessa began, looking at her hands. 2 months ago. It turned out he had more debts than I knew. Gambling debts. We lost the apartment we were renting. I'm living with a friend now. I got a second job. I'm trying to pay off everything we owe. I waited in silence, without offering solutions, without trying to fix her problems. I didn't come to ask for money, she continued. I came to tell you that you were right. About everything. I used you. I treated you horribly. I took advantage of your grief after Dad's death and turned you into something you weren't. I took away your dignity. The tears were rolling freely now. And I'm sorry. God, Mum, I'm so sorry. Why now? I asked gently. Why come and tell me this now? Because I hit rock bottom, she admitted. Because I lost everything. Because I finally understood what I did to you when someone did the same thing to me. She looked up, her red eyes meeting mine. Stanley left me with nothing, Mum. Exactly like I left you. And when I felt used, discarded, invisible, I finally understood. We stayed in silence for a long moment. Part of me wanted to hug her, forgive her immediately, go back to being her protective mother. But the wiser part, the one that had fought so hard to emerge, knew that true forgiveness required more than words. I appreciate your apology, I finally said. I really do. But apologies are only the beginning. Vanessa, I need to see real change. I need time to heal. I need to know that you won't look at me again as a solution to your problems. I understand, she nodded. I don't expect you to forgive me today. I just wanted you to know that I finally get it, and that I'm going to work on being better. Not for you, but for me. We talked for 2 hours that day. It was painful, honest, raw. I told her how I had felt during those 3 years. She told me about her own fears and weaknesses that had led her to justify her actions. We didn't end up as best friends. We didn't hug and promise that everything was fixed. But it was a beginning. When she left, I sat again on my terrace, holding my now cold coffee. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Robert's roses swayed gently in the breeze. I didn't know if Vanessa and I would ever recover what we had lost. I didn't know if she would truly change, or if this was just another temporary pattern. But I knew one thing for certain. I had changed. I had found my voice, my worth, my right to exist as something more than a means to others' ends. It had taken me 69 years to learn that self-love is not selfishness, that setting boundaries is not cruelty, that saying no when necessary is an act of survival, not meanness. I looked at my reflection in the window. I saw a woman with honestly earned wrinkles, with grey hair that I no longer dyed to please others, with eyes that had cried but now shone with something new. Freedom. Robert, I whispered to the wind. I finally did it. I finally stood up for myself. And somewhere, in my most cherished memories, I could hear his voice telling me what he had always said. I'm proud of you, my love. I walked into my house, into my home, closed the door behind me, and smiled. Because today I didn't need anyone's permission to live. Today I didn't have to apologize for existing. Today I was simply Rose, and that was more than enough.